post-game show, the wrap-up. I'm your co-host, Oren Weisfeld. Unfortunately, Sahal couldn't be here today, but we got Zarar from Raptors Republic. So first of all, thank you all you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsor, Arif Qureshi, for supporting the show. And without further ado, we got to get into an absolute thriller of a game. Just a beauty of a game between the Raptors and the Bulls. The Raptors fell to the Bulls 118-95. Zarar, what do you think about the Raptors' effort tonight?
I mean, I thought they played well. I mean, I don't know what the expectations are of a team missing like three starters on a back-to-back on lineups and players that just don't play enough at all. I thought they played well for the most part. I think Norman Lowry kind of tried to take over the game, and they had this like urge to sort of just win the game because they felt that they needed to because they were shorthanded on a back-to-back. Maybe they tried to do a little bit too much, but overall, I think I'm more or less happy with how competitive the Raptors were and the fact they hung around, especially because the Bulls were playing pretty well, even though Levine didn't have a great game. So I'm not too critical of this particular lineup or the effort tonight. It's kind of difficult for me to figure out what to be critical of because this is not the real team. These aren't the real lineups you would play in any sort of normal game. So what do you want me to be upset about? I got nothing, man. I mean, we can get into some small stuff, but overall, man, I mean, kudos to these guys for showing up on a back-to-back and keeping it somewhat competitive.
Yeah, I thought in terms of like their effort, as in terms of how hard they played, and how it was better than last night for sure. Like they were running back at least in transition. They weren't making as many mistakes defensively. They weren't turning the ball over. They were rebounding pretty well, but even doing all the fundamentals pretty well. It was just the skill discrepancy was really apparent. So the only thing I would say, like, if you want to be a negative Nancy and take away from this game, and Joseph Cachero from the Score, he wrote this on Twitter. Basically said like, yeah, they're without three of their best players. You can't be surprised, but at the same time, he basically said there are guys getting an opportunity right now who are not making the most of it. So guys like Stanley Johnson, even Aron Baynes, you can say Bembry isn't playing well. Davis, uh, Matt Thomas, um, Watson. So all those guys, I agree with his point there. Like those guys have really been given a good opportunity here to step up. They're for the most part not high lottery picks. They're guys kind of plucked in the G League from the outskirts, and they've been given probably the biggest opportunity of their career, really, for most of them to play big NBA minutes. And the story of the game was just that none of them could give any offense to the Raptors. It was a little Boucher, it was Powell, and it was Kyle.
So some of the guys
So
you mentioned there, like Stanley Johnson. I mean, so Boucher had a halfway decent game. I think he had like 17 points.
yeah,
Bembry he just had a bad game. Like didn't was not a factor on either end. I think early on he had maybe a like a turnover or something, which threw him off a little bit, or he was part of a play which was part of a turnover. And so besides some of those guys, like who do you expect to step up? Terrence Davis is the only guy that of all the people on this roster that I'm like, man, this guy needs to really step up. Is really him because the Raptors have fed him consistent minutes all season long. Like all season long, despite his troubles, ups and downs on the basketball court, they kept like faith in him and they kept feeding him minutes. He's the guy that I'm like, where is the product of those minutes? Where is the end product of that investment? And I still find that he's the guy who I agree with you should be like elevating his game and becoming the fourth best player maybe given this lineup today. But he's nowhere to be found. And I'm like, if you want to criticize somebody for not stepping up, I think he's the guy. The rest of them, Stanley Johnson, I'm sorry, man, I don't have much expectation of Stanley Johnson beyond hitting a three once in a while and finishing a drive. As long as he's okay defensively, that's kind of like what you expect of Stanley Johnson. I'm not gonna expect him to step up. Like, what did you think? Like, there were people who like had a terrible game beyond like what you expected?
no, it's not that. It's just that I mean, the only way you're gonna win one of these last three games is if someone surprises you. That's kind of the point. Is that one of those guys had to surprise us a little bit, make the most out of their minutes. We like Samson made this point. We'd gotten kind of used to it in past years where like all of a sudden like DeLon Wright or Norm Powell or Pirtle would just have a great game off the bench and you'd be like, oh man, we got that sitting there. So it's kind of discouraging just that none of them are giving us that surprise. I agree with your Davis point. I just think every time he's asked to step into a bigger role where he has to use a little more decision making skills, he fails. I also think Baynes can be put in the same category. Yes, he's a starter, so you might say like, well, he's kind of already part of the core, but like he's still not like an essential part of this team. He's more of a role player in that mold, and like they actually run a lot through him on the offensive end. He's a huge part of their offense when these guys are out with his screen setting. But like you can't be an effective screen setter if you have no gravity rolling to the rim. And it felt like every time he got like a pocket pass, his touch is just disgustingly off. And it's like he's a guy who he had to do a little more scoring inside, I think, if they're gonna win.
And like the screens that he sets, the effective ones are actually off the ball. It's like he
Yeah.
will screen out a guy who's not expecting to be screened and open up. I think he opened up Lowry for a three in the corner using that same technique, basically like a hammer screen or whatever. He's good at those, but with the ball when you're running the pick and roll with him, obviously he's not a roll option really anymore. Even though he was in previous years with Boston, he used to roll a lot. For whatever reason, with the Raptors, I think his hands have just stopped listening to his brain is my only explanation for Baynes. Is that
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to his ability to catch the ball and go up because he's been doing it pretty consistently his entire career. And suddenly, maybe it's the cold. I don't know. Maybe it's the temperature. Just is, but he's in Tampa, so that's not even a thing anymore, right? I mean, I cannot explain Baynes to you. But I
Yeah.
think I did have expectations of him when we signed him, but at this point, on like March 14th, those expectations have long gone, man. I have nothing from nothing coming from Baynes. Sometime on Twitter raised one of the replies to one of the highlight videos was that is there any reason to play Boucher like behind Baynes? Like why would you play Baynes over Boucher other than just pure rest? Because the idea that Boucher is somewhat gets like thrown around a lot, I think is a little overblown. I think he does get like pushed around more than average, but I think he does a lot of other things that make up for that. So overall, I mean, Chris Boucher should be playing like at least like 25, 28 minutes a game, like no questions asked.
Yeah, I mean, you did see Thad Young kind of post him up in the fourth quarter, and he couldn't stop him from moving at all. But in general, I mean, me and Sal talked about this last game. It doesn't make sense to me why Baynes is still starting when he's been one of the worst drivers of success on this team, and Boucher's been one of the best. I mean, you could talk about foul trouble. You could talk about not wanting to get him hit by those big bodies, but at the end of the day, if you wanna give yourself the best start and give yourself the best chance to win, I don't really understand the decision making. What do you think about Henry Ellenson? Is he
We'll get to Henry. Can we talk about Lowry's technicals first?
sure? What was his first one?
Okay.
Remind me.
Do you think I don't care what his actual technicals were, but I'm just talking about his mentality when getting a tech. Does he think that getting a technical will increase the chance that he'll get the call later on in the game? Like, does he? Do you think he believes that?
No, I think he just likes to talk all game, and I think some refs get fed up at a certain point and hand him a tech like randomly, and I don't think he's ever expecting to get the tech. I think he just likes talking a lot, and then some refs will take issue with it and tee him up.
I thought he got legit fouled a couple times on his drives in the fourth quarter, and the refs
Yeah,
just didn't call it. They just,
yeah.
whatever reason, they just did not make the call. And then I thought to myself, like, his earlier, like, mouthing off to the ref, did that help him in this situation?
Yeah, but it's too late to change him, man. He talks from the start of the game to the end. Like he'll never change at this point in
No, yeah,
his
you're right.
career.
You're right. I mean, yeah, I'm just thinking out loud. Yeah,
But
sorry,
yeah, you're right.
Ellenson,
It
Ellenson.
probably doesn't help. I think no, I think refs hate Kyle Lowry. I think 80% of the refs in the league despise him because he's constantly talking shit to them, telling them they missed a call, they're bad at their job. Like you catch him telling him this shit all the time. So I wouldn't be surprised if they don't like him.
All right, Ellenson.
Yeah, I mean, even Ellenson has a case to play over Baynes at this point. Not because like he's better, but because he can shoot and because he's younger and he's a development case, and we know what we're getting out of Baynes right now, and it's not good. So I think even he has a case if you don't want to start Boucher. Maybe start Ellenson next game and just give him a little time.
Andrew Damelin, who follows the 905 for Raptors Republic, he had a like a tweet. He's like, "What do you guys think of Ellenson?" And my response was exactly that. Is that he sets decent screens. When he drives hard. Like the couple of times he drove today, like with the ball, was pretty aggressive, and I like that. And he got fouled, I think, both times. So definitely can set screens. Is supposed to be a better 3-point shooter. It drives to the rim more. You can probably play him in more offensive configurations than you can Baynes. Why not? And he's got the development side. I totally agree. In a meaningless game, well, not a meaningless game, but if you got to give minutes to somebody and expect like similar levels of production, probably, Ellenson is the better idea. It's just Baynes is a little bit more experienced and won't make like silly mistakes. Like he'll make the baseline play more often than Ellenson, and Ellenson will take a little while before he makes the baseline play, like the basic expectation. So are you willing to live with 20 games of like Ellenson mistakes in the regular season to get him up to like Baynes' level of, comfortness or how comfortable he is in a lineup? I think that's the only question.
Yeah, I think Baynes is a better defender, but I watched a good amount of 905 games too. And Ellenson, he's actually he doesn't look out of place defensively as much as I thought he would. Like you said, I really like his screen setting. He hits you on the screens. He's not just like big, but he really hits you. And then yeah, his best skill is the shooting, and it hasn't even come along at the NBA level, but it will. Like in the G League, he makes like JJ Redick type leaners from three. Like he makes off balance shots from three consistently. He's a really impressive shooter. And then yeah, the like taking guys off the dribble, like attacking closeouts. He's also really mobile at doing that. So offensively, there's no complaints. Defensively, you could definitely Baynes is a little better at this point in his career, but I don't think Ellenson has actually looked as bad as I thought he would. I thought he's been pretty good. So yeah.
Talk a little bit of Norm, trade Norm. Can we? I think now's the time to talk about it.
Yeah.
If not now, then when? Like, shut the site down if we're not talking about Norm, because
I've said my take on this.
Go for it. What's your take on Norm? It's got to be black and white, though. You can't have too many ifs or any caveats built into there.
I've always been on the trade Norm thing. The only caveat is unless he's like, I want to resign here at like a cheaper hometown discount. But other than that, I'm in favor of trading him, whether you're getting a first round pick or another wing or center who can kind of balance this roster out. Just because I think there's so many guards they're trying to develop, it's really hard to find them time with Norm playing 30 minutes a game. So I'm definitely pro trading him. Obviously, if you get a nice enough offer. But I'm also like not someone who's saying like, I don't think building through the draft is necessarily the right mentality, because I think that implicates that the Raptors should aim to win 3 years from now. Whereas I actually think next year and the year after that, that's their window. Because, OG, Fred, and Siakam are all signed for 3 more years or 4 more years. It's not like they're signed for 7 years. In the modern NBA, you have to take your chances. You can't say, 5 years from now, when those guys are in the thick of their prime, will be really good. So I think extra draft picks are nice because we need more development prospects, and also you can always flip draft picks in the future. But also I'm just looking to get pieces that fit around those guys a little better. Like, as much as I like Norm and as much as I like that small ball lineup, I think there's a reality where you can find a different wing who even fits that small ball lineup even a little better. Like Thad Young is like a guy who I think if you plugged him in the Norm spot, the Raptors aren't getting worse necessarily.
Thad Young's rumors to Toronto have been going on for like 10 years. Like there's always like at some deadline.
He's just like a solid player. It makes
Yeah,
sense.
it
Like
just makes sense. Like I think I remember like back in the Chris Bosh days. I think people were like Thad Young for Chris Bosh. I don't know. I think it might be. Um,
where are you at with
with
Norm?
Norm, yeah, I think you have to trade him because I don't think his value will necessarily increase beyond what it is right now. And given the risk of losing him for nothing, unless you have a surety or some sort of like gentleman's agreement that he's going to sign at a particular number and you've got the cap space thing figured out, I don't see how you can even afford to keep him on. Because you can't pay him. So I'm definitely for Norm. The draft picks versus player doesn't bug me as much because, as you said, I think that the way you plan for it, your planning horizon is just shorter in the NBA now than what it used to be. I don't think you have like a 5 year plan and on year three I'll do this and then year three is going to be the one where I compete. I think that kind of thinking has gone out the window. I think for a while now. So getting draft picks in return may just be exactly what you want because people are always looking for draft picks. I think everybody is always looking to acquire draft picks as part of some deal. And the Raptors, even after trading Norm, would have enough assets here and there to actually package them with the draft picks and do something with it. So the draft picks part doesn't bother me. I don't think you're gonna get, you know, is there a guy that you are targeting for Norm like in your trades? Like Clint Capella is somebody that I was like, man, that'd be a decent trade for Norm if that happens somehow. They get a
Yeah.
scorer, we get what we need. Probably not going to happen, but that's the kind of player that ideally I would want if it's not draft pick. Somebody you can like kind of who number one fills a problem right now and does so in a starter capacity.
Yeah, I don't think Capella's on the market, but we know that John Collins is, who is not as clean as a fit because he's not really a five. I still think John Collins, I'd pick him over Norm if building forward, just because I think he can play the five beside OG and Pascal because those two are just kind of unique as a front court. And offensively, he'd be a really, really good fit. And then Rashawn Holmes. So those are two guys I would definitely trade Norm for, but I don't really think those teams would do those swaps one for one. And then I don't think the Raptors are trading their first round pick this year. But it's possible. I mean, those are two kind of silly teams. So especially the Sacramento Kings. So it's possible. Um, but yeah, like guys like that who kind of fill your long term need at center are guys I would be looking for. You look at Jared Allen, and he just got traded for basically like the 25th at best pick in the draft. So, like, that's, I think Norm's worth more than the 25th pick in the draft. I think he's worth John Collins level, which they were basically asking for like a lottery pick. Um, I
They're
think
also
Norm's worth
kind of deep at
that.
that position anyways a little bit. Like I know they don't have like a ready replacement, but they have I don't know what will amount to Davis. They have Malachi Flynn kind of in the similar size role area, so they can afford to
Yeah.
let Norm go and not fall too deep. Like they will definitely
And
lose the
then
scoring and it'll hurt. But if they're able to somehow replace that with maybe one guy coming in and doing a little bit better, I don't know. Do you feel there's somebody who could take Norm's minutes and produce like at 50% the capacity or the production?
Yeah, I actually think Bembry is the guy who could produce in that capacity. Not because he's a shooter like Norm, but he does some of the same things like coming off dribble handoffs, um, and attacking the basket. He's really good at that. He's good at playmaking from that position. He's not as good as a shooter, obviously, but he'll shoot it if he's open. I think Bembry's like the immediate replacement. But long term, Jalen Harris is he's very much in the Norm mold. He's a really good shooter. Does a lot of similar things. I think like if you're thinking 2-3 years from now, yeah, I think he could definitely get there. But also looking at the teams we just talked about, Atlanta and Sacramento, the reason those things might be possible is because they have the opposite problem where Sacramento has they have their young center who they just drafted who is basically getting benched. His name is losing me right now, but that's like an issue in the locker room. And then in Atlanta, they just drafted Onyeka Okongwu. They have Clint Capella. Like they're pretty deep in the front court too. So those are possibilities just for the roster balancing reasons.
I think Jalen Harris. I mean, I put Malachi Flynn kind of ahead of him, but yeah, there's enough cover with Norm leaves that we may be able to survive for a little longer, and especially like given this year, the chances of a title seem to be sort of slim. It makes sense to kind of go in the summer and retool for next year. I think, and this is nothing new. When the season started, we all kind of had exactly similar kind of expectations of the season to kind of go and figure out what we have and then make the decision on Norm and maybe come back next year. The only thing that maybe hasn't really, this COVID thing has obviously thrown us off because we're missing games left and right. So other than that, and we should remember before the injuries, the Raptors were playing pretty well. So there's really not too much to be concerned about. The only decision the Raptors, I think, at this point have to make is Norm, and I think I would imagine they would trade him. Do you want to talk a little bit about the game?
What do you have to say about it? I mean, we did at the beginning.
I mean, there's not much to say about this game. I will say, Paul Watson. Because I've heard so much about Paul Watson. Like every 905 person that I talk to, and like hey, who's somebody to watch out for? It's like Paul Watson. And every time he comes on the court, I find that he somewhat lacks defensively, first of all. Like, I don't think he's a great defender. I think he's a bit of a maybe that's not playing enough NBA minutes, but overall he seems somewhat of a liability. And scoring-wise, he's definitely inconsistent. What is your take on him? Do you think that dude has a path to the starting lineup in the next year and a half or so?
No, I wouldn't go that far, but I think he has a rotation path. I just think he looks out of his comfort zone, which kind of makes sense given that this is his first. He was never even a rotation guy, and now he's playing like 25 minutes a night all of a sudden. So that's a lot. Defensively, I kind of like how he like fights over screens. I have no problem there, but he's really skinny and he gets knocked off his spot really easily. So I think the weight room is like his best path to defensive. And then like all rookies make mistakes. So I think those just come with reps. But he is definitely too skinny to play. Like he's basically playing the 3 in some lineups. And like, that's going to be really tough for him in terms of like a size mismatch.
Do you think it's fair to evaluate Matt Thomas in these minutes that he's getting right now and seeing how much like, is he progressing enough towards a rotation spot?
I think it's fair to evaluate Matt Thomas from the beginning of the season. Like people want to come at Nick Nurse for not playing him, but Matt Thomas in the NBA, you don't like nothing is given to you. You have to earn it. And he just hasn't earned it all season. Every time he's been put out there, he's a 3-point specialist and he shot what from this year? Like I bet it's under 40%. I don't have it right now, but he's not even shooting the 3.
He's not shooting the 3. That's my problem with him, is that there are moments where he has enough space to get a shot off, but he, for some reason, will try to like dig in or do a little drive when that's not his job. Like that comes maybe later, but the amount, like I think he's expecting more space to be available to him before he shoots, when what is available to him is what he's always going to get. And he's got to get comfortable with that. I think he's waiting for space that'll never come. So he better get shooting, man. That's my thing on Matt. I think if he shoots, if his volume increases, I think he'll shoot at a decent clip and he'll be a poor man's JJ Redick for us. But he's not even taking the shots right now.
Yep. Yeah, he's kind of been a disappointment all season. Him and Terrence Davis, I think, are the same vein of guys who last season kind of thrived because it was a hyper-specific role they were put in, like go out there, make spot-up threes. You're not in the scouting report for the other team, so you're going to have these opportunities. You make them, and then on defense, you just fight. This season, they're asked to do way more, especially in games like this. And I wrote about this, like this isn't just a COVID thing. The Raptors are 1-6 on the second night of back-to-backs heading into this game. So anytime their core players have to basically don't have great games, don't have their legs under them, the bench has to step up. Every time this season, it's been bad. So this isn't necessarily an anomaly. This is just another example of the bench kind of being not very good. Yeah.
It's like the fact that we have so many back-to-backs coming up and these guys can't seem to, hold it
It's
on.
so crazy,
Yeah,
right?
it's
8
eight
back-to-backs.
more. Like I think that the entire
Crazy.
season used to have like 8 back-to-backs, like not too long ago. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean the back-to-backs are a problem. But again, let's go back to the idea that this is not the full Raptors team, so you can't really evaluate everybody on it. I think somebody made a point that um, the way at the speed at which Norm and Kyle were playing the game today was different than the speed that guys like Ellenson and Matt Thomas, who hasn't played much, and Paul Watson, they expect to play the game at. So even though they're making the right play, it's just too fast for the people who are on the court. And a couple times you saw like Norm Powell zip something to Chris Boucher right down the lane, and it hits him like on his torso and just bounces off, or it's too low and he's got to bend down. This happened like on both a fair amount, especially with Lowry not being on the same, like expecting guys to be at a particular spot and having to pull back instead of pass. So maybe those guys had to adapt a little bit better with the guys they're playing with, rather than us always expecting these new guys to kind of step up and get into the same rhythm with like veterans like Lowry and Norm.
Yeah, but I don't know. I would push back just because like you don't really change your style. Like each team has a system and they're not going to change it based on the personnel. And the Raptors like to run. Like a lot of their offense depends on transition buckets. And I agree with that point. Like they looked all out of sorts when they ran. Yeah, they just couldn't keep up with Kyle and Norm, who were basically pushing it into the teeth of the defense. No one else could make a play off of that. We could end it here with this. Like, is there anything that the Raptors could show between now and next Thursday trade deadline that would make you say, okay, this team either okay, this team can actually win a playoff round or two and compete, or okay, this team should be like buyers, or they should at least stand pat and they should really go for it? Is there anything?
Anything that would change my perspective on the team? I think we've seen
Yeah.
enough of this team at this point. I think when fully healthy, they totally can win a playoff round. I think they for sure can. I don't think that's even a question. Now, if they're like the 8th seed and they're against like with freaking against Milwaukee or whatever,
Yeah.
they might take Milwaukee out. To be honest with you, but if it's against Philly,
Yeah.
maybe whatever, different story. But if it's against like Boston, man, I could see, maybe us giving Boston a bit of a fight. As
Yeah.
a 7 to 8 seed, they'll have a tough time winning a playoff series. But other than that, they may win one. Um, but no, man, I think the only question really is just the Norm question. I don't think the Raptors are going to dramatically change their outlook this season based on any sort of move they make. Maybe Masai has like a DeRozan type trade here, which gets us somebody massive, but I just don't see that miracle happening because the only trade chip you really have is Norm. So the inbound on the return value on any trade is probably going to be around Norm, and that's not going to dramatically change our outlook. So maybe we'll win a playoff round, be competitive in the second, and I think that's what the season was sort of about. I think the other thing that we have to talk about when we talk about this season is really how much further have OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam developed? Like, what has this year bought us in terms of those two guys' overall development? Because at the end of the day, that's our main investment, and that's the investment that we're hoping kind of improves and increases the franchise's overall value. So I think that's the question you got to ask at some point, not whether the Raptors are going to win a playoff round or not.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough question to answer because especially with OG, who's been out with injury twice in between this COVID stuff. Pascal, I actually think, is playing maybe the best basketball of his career, minus the 3-point shooting, for this season, other than the start of the season, obviously. If you look at his numbers, everything is more efficient. The post ups, not the isolations, but the pick and roll ball handler, pick and roll roll man. His assist percentage has gone up dramatically while his turnover percentage has held steady. So Pascal, I'm actually, considering how the season started, I'm pretty optimistic because I'm also optimistic that 3-point shot is going to come around soon enough. OG, I think, is the guy who has just been so in and out of the lineup. His 3-point shot is nice, but other than that, I don't think he's given enough consistent offense to this team. He really relies on people creating 3-point shots for him, and other than that, um, obviously his defense is good, but other than that, I don't know how much he's doing on offense. I kind of would have liked to see him take a bit more of a leap when he has on ball opportunities. I think with OG, something that I've been thinking about recently, thinking about writing about is like, what is OG going forward? Because he's played in all these different roles with the Raptors and he can do all of them a little bit, but like what's his best like development point going forward? As in like, is he a center? Do we like play him as like a roll man, a pop guy, screen setter, like, Bam Adebayo type guy? Or are we talking more about like a Kawhi Leonard type wing? Um, or is he like Zion? I think he actually looks a lot like Zion when he goes downhill. So like what do we want from him going forward?
I don't know. A lot of things you're talking
Offensively.
about when you're comparing them is like more like how is OG going to get his points? Like, is it going to
Yeah.
be in the block? Is it going to be with the wing? Is it going to be in the on the near the elbow? I don't know if there's a need to actually worry about that or define
That's what I was thinking too. I
where he's
think
going to get those. The point is that he can get them.
yeah.
And the position thing is actually it's a huge asset. I think our thinking
Yeah.
has so changed in terms of like 15, 20 years ago, where it was like, where does this guy fit? And we don't even ask that question anymore. Like, it's almost become redundant. So I don't care about that. I think he. So by the way, I'm happy on both players, Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. I thought Siakam would be a better offensive player at this point. I thought he'd be a little bit more refined. He just has not done that. Like, I don't think I expected him to develop like a smooth pull-up game, maybe something reliable, maybe a Chris Bosh type jumper. That hasn't happened, but the season's not over yet, and I think that's his next step. Not the three, as you wrote in your article on he should be shooting more threes. I think he should be shooting more just straight up twos before he extends his range to three. That basic philosophy, like just learn to shoot the easier shot before you shoot the
Yeah, but
harder
he
shot.
already shot the 3 well last season. So
But
he's already learned it.
but back to OG. Sorry, I went on a Siakam tangent. But back to OG. I think he can be quite easily a 22, 25 point scorer in this league. No problem. I think he has enough. Like, if you feed him enough possessions, if he took the same possessions that Norm takes, or like
Yeah.
just takes and for his own offense, he'd be a pretty efficient player. And he hasn't even had any reps in that type of role. So if you give him reps, if you feed him the ball, you'll get higher proportion production than a lot of other guys on this team. So I'm not worried about OG there. He's not
Yeah.
going to be a tier 1 player, but overall I'm happy on both counts. So this season is so far sort of going on track. I think we just got to reset ourselves to September or whatever, November, and you'll find that our expectations and what's actually happening are pretty much aligned.
Yeah, I mean, real quick on OG. So I was thinking about writing this piece, like explaining what is OG offensively, and then like the more I thought about it, the more I kind of came to the same conclusion, which is like the fact that he does all of these things when asked of him is actually what he is. Like, he is the most like unique player because he can play all of these different ways. And I think the Raptors are actually probably doing the right thing and just giving him reps in every single situation, because you never know, against certain opponents you might need him to play the 5 and be a pick and pop guy. Against certain opponents you might need him spot up. I actually think, in terms of like the Powell comparison, I really think when I watch OG, his best asset as a scorer is very similar to Zion. And when he's going downhill, he puts a shoulder into a guy and he's so strong that he can feast around the rim. Like, I would like to see them put him more of those, put him in more of those downhill actions where he's going to have an easier time getting to the rim. But yeah.
And you're saying that, I'm assuming, because he has to handle the ball less. Like, the ball handling is simpler when he's in those situations that you described.
Yes, yeah. And I also like just would rather him do that than then like maneuver around a screen and take a pull-up jumper, because he's so strong and so fast that like I just think you're using his skill set a little better when you have him going right into the teeth of the defense, than pulling up.
Well, I think one of his assets is that he is able to pretty easily create space in that 8 to 10 foot jumper area, just because of the exact same reason that you just said, is that he gets to the rim and he barrels down the middle and he has enough strength to carry him. I think if he does all that, developing a short jumper, like Kawhi style jumper in that area, is easy. Like, you've already
Mm-hmm.
done the hard part of getting it. Now it's a question of just pulling back and releasing like a soft. And he has done that. He's done that more this year than he has last year. I bet Samson would know because he's like watched every possession like 20 times. But
Yeah,
I should ask him. I would imagine OG is more taking that jumper this year than last.
no, he is for sure. And his like his efficiency as a pick and roll ball handler is like very high. So people like Samson have been saying that he should have more screen help and have the ball in his hands more. But it's just a matter of how do you use that screen help? Do you use it at the perimeter? Do you use it with like a small setting a downhill screen so he can get into the paint? That's like, I guess, the question now, because he is efficient.
Yeah. All right, man. Let's wrap it up, man.
Anyways,
Yeah.
it's 12
Yeah.
a.m.
Wrap
here
it
on
up.
the East Coast. The Raptors just lost their fourth consecutive game. So we've talked by far long enough. We'll be back here on Tuesday when the Raptors will play another team, I think Detroit, and they'll have all their players back, hopefully. That would be really nice. Thank you for joining us. Like the video, please, on YouTube. And yeah, we'll see you then.